1159, the neighbor's voice starts slow, dry numbers sliding down the stairwell like sand. And by the stroke of midnight, the room tastes faintly of metal and old rain. You tell yourself it's a drunk counting, until the final syllable takes a little more of the air out of the apartment. Before we go any further, I'll ask you for a favor. Like the video, subscribe to my channel, and leave a comment below this video with what time you listened to this story Maya moved into the rent-stained building, because the landlord's only rule sounded like folklore. Never count after midnight. The first time she ignored it, she woke to the hollow echo of her own number, and the radiator's steam went still, as if listening. At first, it was small, the kind of thing you could fold into explanation. She told herself the neighbor was a man with a bad drinking habit, or a bored night worker counting bolts and screws, or a child down the hall rehearsing numbers for a school test. But then the voice changed the night she first slept through it. She dreamed of clasped hands and a mouth full of paper, and woke with the taste of old rain in her teeth and a single thin number rolling around the walls like a coin. It was 3 in the morning, but the number kept its place like a metronome, tapping the plaster when she blinked. She got up, half expecting to find a neighbor in the stairwell counting with a cigarette and a smirk. But the steps were empty, and the building smelled of laundry and something older. The landlord, a narrow man who stored shells in jars and read aloud to his plants, shrugged when she mentioned it and said the rule was a joke, a superstition passed down from tenants who liked to pretend they had names for the building's moods. Maya liked names. She respected rituals, even silly ones. It gave her the illusion that the world arranged itself into patterns she could understand. So she obeyed. She stopped humming while she washed dishes after 11. She didn't count pills when she took them, and she kept quiet in the corridor, listening instead for the scrape of a cart or a barking dog. It made the nights more ordinary, as if not voicing numbers could keep the building indifferent. Still, the rule had teeth. At 11:59, the stairwell would begin to breathe. Numbers came first, thin and dry like a string of beads, scraping for purchase on the banister. They weren't exactly human, no lilt, no shame, only the mechanical cadence of tallying. Then the light in the single bulb outside Maya's door would drain a little, as if the filament sighed and stopped trying. She began to notice small things going missing. First a button, then a postcard, a corner of a receipt that returned to her in dreams, or at the bottom of a coat she hadn't worn in months. Each time it was preceded by a counting, always starting somewhere low and climbing like a hand up a staircase. Once, when she whispered a number under her breath, as if testing the boundary, the radiator's steam stopped mid-hiss, and the paper on her table folded inward. It was not malevolent, at least not like the things of children's nightmares, but it was precise and hungry, patient enough for long tallies. The rule carried with it a human myth. Tenants who counted after midnight lost more than sleep. They misplaced parts of themselves. It sounded like the kind of story old women told with teacups in their laps. But the building's breath made even the silly grief feel true. Maya laughed at it sometimes, not because she didn't believe, but because belief without mockery felt easier to panic over. Her apartment became a ledger. She kept lists in a notebook and numbered small victories: laundry done, rent paid, plants watered, like bets against the counting. When the stairwell voice began, those small victories would pulse on her tongue like coins. One evening, she stayed late at work, 5 minutes past 11, and the building hummed as if expecting her to make a mistake. She washed her hands in the office bathroom until the water ran cold, then wrapped her fingers around the railing and let the numbers begin. 1, 2, 3, quiet, private, testing. It felt ridiculous and monstrous at the same time, a child's game that could hollow out a woman. On the landing, a bulb flickered, and the neighbors' doors made small sounds like fish moving. She reached 7, and something in the building sighed with satisfaction. Then she felt, very clearly, a subtraction. Her keys were lighter in her hand. The keychain's photograph looked at her with a thinner face. A line of memory unstitched itself from the seam of her day: what she had for breakfast, an apology she had meant to make, and drifted like lint down the stairwell. She felt a thin, stupid grief for the loss of small things, and worse, for the way the number had taken the shape of her voice. At home, she checked lists and drawers and under the couch, but the missing pieces did not return. Instead, she dreamed the tally climbing above her bed like a mobile, each figure a moon rotating out of reach. She cursed the rule softly and then obeyed it for 2 weeks, then 3, then until the pattern felt less like fear and more like architecture. The building, in return, settled into a predictability that made her mornings possible. But rules are fragile when they depend on a single mind holding them. And the night the new tenant moved in below, the air shifted. His name was Carl on the mailbox, a blunt stamp of letters. And he had a recorder. He used to play old radio dramas into the dark. Maya met him once when she carried groceries down, and the stairwell smelled like coffee and cigarettes, and he laughed when she mentioned the counting. He called it a quirk and promised not to bother her. His laugh was the kind that makes you believe in temporary kindness. For 3 nights, there was nothing beyond the usual breath. The tally kept like a clock. Then, on the 4th night, Maya heard a recorder playing numbers faintly under the stairs. They were dry and thin, the same tone as the stairwell voice, but with an applause of tape hiss. Subscribe now if you want the rest. She waited at the top of the stairs, listening to the thin arithmetic, feeling as if she were outside a room where a school exercise was repeating itself, until the sentences in the book wore through. The voice reached a number that made the hair along her forearm stand up: 18, then 19. And with each syllable, the building seemed to take inventory. Maya felt exposed, counted on, as if the tally could be reading her like print. She moved quietly to the neighbor's door and pressed her ear to the wood. The recorder played in muffled succession, and behind it, the building hummed like a throat. She heard a syllable that could have been her apartment number, or a year, or a fragment of a promise she had made to someone whose face had gone pale in memory. When the count reached 23, Maya felt the edges of a memory loosen, the scent of a sweater, a line from a poem she liked, and a part of her past slid like a coin into the stairwell's dark. Fear is arithmetic of a different kind. It reduces you to sums and remainders. Maya stepped back, fingers white on the knob, and for the first time considered the possibility that obeying the rule was not just avoiding loss, but keeping something from using her voice. She slept badly that night, ear tuned to the recorder's distant arithmetic, like a ship's captain listening for foghorns. When she woke, a small slip of paper lay on her pillow, a torn corner from a receipt, the ink smudged into something like a number. Maya kept it in the notebook beside her lists and circled it with a pen, as if by containment she might reclaim what it took. The landlord told her again the story of the building's first owners, a couple who numbered their possessions to ward off bad luck, until one morning they woke and could not remember the faces of their children. He mumbled the morals to her, but his eyes were always on the hall, as if listening to an argument he couldn't join. Days blurred into a ledger of careful habits. Doors locked, windows latched, numbers avoided like broken glass. But the recorder beneath the stairs kept counting, and sometimes the tape played back fragments she didn't remember speaking. At night, the apartment tasted of metal again, faint as a memory of rain, and Maya traced the ledger with a thumb, as if following the rhythm of a pulse. Maya found the cassette taped to the underside of the radiator cover, a scrawl of ink across its face that could have been a name or a scrape of a thumb. The tape hissed when she pried it loose, a dry, patient breathing. It smelled faintly of iron and old rain, the way the hallway tasted at midnight. She took it back to her living room like a contraband relic and set the recorder on the coffee table with hands that trembled at the base of the fingers. The neighbor's door across the hall hung open, a dark mouth. The apartment was a bowl of weak light. Outside, the streetlights bled into a puddle of useless glass. She had listened once before, through the thin door, when the neighbor's voice had poured down the stairwell like sand. It had sounded like a drunk counting. This tape was different. The voice was close. It was intimate, as though someone had cupped her face and traced numbers across her skin. There was no prelude, only a single breath, and then the slow, dry digits 1, 2, 3 clipped, almost indifferent. Between each syllable, the recorder left a hollow space. In those gaps, the walls seemed to bend toward her. At first, the theft was subtle. She sat cross-legged on the threadbare rug and fed the plastic ribbon through the recorder. The room contracted with each number. The radiator breathed. The first few digits climbed like stone steps. She checked her hands for trembling. She checked her wallet. She checked the list of names on the scrap of paper she kept in her phone, names of people she saw every week, minor fixtures of life. After 9, the scrap did not look the same. A quick fumble, a missing margin where a name had been. She told herself it was fatigue. She told herself she was superstitious. The voice continued. It did not rush. It did not hurry. It tallied with the patient correctness of a ledger. Each spoken digit left a cool vacancy behind it, like a shoe removed from a foot. At 13, she reached for the lamp and could not remember whether she had moved in with a couch or without. At 14, she forgot the sound of the kettle boiling. At 16, she could not remember the smell of her mother's hair. The digits were small excisions, minute, surgical. They stole edges first, corners of memory where names lived, the shape of her routine. They did not take the whole things at once. They took the labels, the word for the smell, the name for the face. She paused the tape and laughed at herself. A short, brittle sound. Her laugh was foreign in the room. She walked to the window and looked out at the building's yawning face. Across the way, the vacant apartment's door swung a slow, patient arc. The hallway light flickered like it was measuring breaths. She kept telling herself she could stop the tape. She kept telling herself she could refuse the counting. Her finger hovered over the plastic switch and then dropped, as if gravity itself had been turned down. When she pressed play again, the voice was closer, like someone standing behind her with a palm at the base of her skull. The numbers began to stack. 19, 20, 21. With every count, something slackened in her head. An afternoon, the title of a book, the exact pitch of her father's apologies. She tried to grip them, to name them out loud, but the words fluttered away like moths. When the voice reached 27, she felt her own name slip, as if ink were being scrubbed from the corner of a paper. It did not leave with drama. It was a slow erasure, patient and thorough. Maya felt her name go soft in her mouth, a thread pulled through a needle. She searched for it and found only a blurred place where identity should sit. She rewound the tape and listened again, as if repetition could reverse a theft. The same digits, the same voice. None of the missing pieces returned. She tried to call her brother, but his number dialed into an answering machine she did not recognize. She tried to check a photograph on her phone and found a face with eyes that were vaguely hers, but belonged to someone else. Panic began to tone her breath into tight, hard lines. Her hands moved quicker now, as if speed could outrun the numbers. 2 nights later, the neighbor's door was shut, and then ajar, and then shut. On the 3rd night, it was silent as a mouth sewn shut. Police came and took statements about smoke alarms and water meters. They measured footprints and did not measure the things that go missing in rooms. There were theories about someone leaving in the night, about a landlord selling the building, about a life folded into a suitcase. Maya peered down the stairwell and watched the stair light blink in a rhythm that matched the tape, soft stutter, pause, soft stutter. The hallway seemed to be tallying its own steps. She returned to the recorder, as if to a guilty instrument. She framed it with both hands and felt the plastic press into her palms. Her fingers hovered over the fast-forward button and then moved, reluctant, deliberate. The tape ran. The numbers continued. The recorder did not sound like a machine. It sounded like a throat. Each digit on the tape took an extra thing from her: memories, phrases, the color of certain shirts. By 31, she no longer remembered the exact shade of the paint in her own kitchen. By 36, she could not summon the tune to a song that used to make her cry. When she tried to hum it, silence sprawled in her mouth. Maya tried to destroy it. She lifted the recorder and struck it against the edge of the coffee table until the body of the device rattled and coughed and finally fell apart like a small animal. Plastic teeth shattered across the rug. The cassette popped from the gullet of the machine like a small, obedient thing. She took a hammer to the tape itself, smashing the spool until the ribbon unspooled like ribboned entrails. She lit the fragments with a lighter and watched the sliver of flame eat the plastic. The tape smoldered and curled, and for a moment she felt a fresh, fierce relief. The hiss of the recorder was gone. The room breathed, and then the numbers came back, not from the defunct machine, but from the walls. They leaked through the plaster like water down a forgotten wall. The digits separated syllables from the air and stitched them into the cupboard and between ceiling joists. They threaded themselves into the baseboard with the same casual cruelty: 40, 41, 42. And every utterance left a colder hollow. She covered her ears and still heard them. The sound crawled up through the floor and behind her teeth. It was not only the voice, it was the shape of counting pressed into the bones of the building. The radiator's steam held its breath, listening. The light bulb in the ceiling guttered and then steadied, dim as a dying eye. The apartment felt like a mouth holding in a scream. Her name thinned further until reaching for it felt like reaching for a dream through mattress springs. What made her stagger was the realization that the counting had changed voice. It was not the neighbor now. It had the roundness of her own vowels. At first, she thought she was imagining it, that grief was turning everything into mimicry. But then she heard a syllable she knew to be hers, flat, familiar, private, and it was counting. Her voice said a number she could not quite remember learning to say. It spoke with the cadence of someone reading aloud from a life worn thin. She dropped to her knees. Her mouth formed shapes she could not control. Her tongue pressed at teeth and tried to stop the syllable. But the number came out with the smooth inevitability of a conclusion. She tried to leave. She threw on her coat and grabbed her keys and realized she could not remember locking the door in the first place. The hallway stretched away from her like an arid road, each step measured by a deepening hollow in the stair treads. On the landing, she met another tenant returning with a grocery bag. Eyes flared with the dusk of a frightened bird. He saw her, and his face slackened, as if someone had turned the warmth out of him. He did not speak her name when she tried to ask if he'd heard anything. He could not remember the word for the thing she described. He could not remember his sister's name. He looked over his shoulder and mouthed a number, absent-minded, as if he were counting potatoes in the bag back in the apartment. The counting accelerated. It was not loudly spoken so much as threaded into the room like wires that hummed. Numbers slid up through the sink, braided into the curtain, nested behind picture frames. Each digit was precise, merciless, and accounting. She realized then that the building was not simply stealing fragments, it was cataloging them, stacking them in some invisible ledger. The missing pieces of people collected under the floorboards like dust. There were other signs. The landlord's knock at the door became softer, more practiced, as if he were learning to ask permission from shadows. He asked if she'd been seeing anything unusual, and then did not remember leaving the building. At some point, she stopped fighting and listened. The voice that was hers counted in a grainy monotone, and the numbers crawled along her ribs like an insect. She tried to tell herself a joke, a cheap recollection of a summer shed spent laughing until her cheeks hurt. But the punchline slid out of reach. She tried to say her name and found a silent space where it should have been. She reached for her reflection in the window and did not recognize the hesitant set of her mouth. There was a small, cowardly portion of her that entertained the idea she could bargain with the arithmetic. If she gave the building something valuable in exchange, if she named the first thing it begged for, would it stop? The counting paused, as if waiting to see what she would do. The silence it left was heavy and watchful. When she opened her mouth, the number that formed was not a plea, but a ledger entry. She said it and felt a physical unraveling happen in the room. The curtains inhaled, the radiator exhaled. The walls tilted the fraction of an inch toward her and took. She felt her memory of a childhood holiday leave in a single slow sweep. The apartment seemed to settle, more comfortable now that it had the shape of her absence around 37. The counting went on without her intervention. Her voice continued, but sometimes it spoke a number before she could even think of it. It was not only counting, it was learning. It learned the way her tongue preferred certain consonants. It learned how she hesitated on vowels. It was raising its voice on the syllables where she kept her own secrets, and then letting them fall away like old curtains. The thing in the walls was patient. You could feel its patience pressing at the windowsills, reshaping the paint to accommodate another notch in its tally by the time the sequence neared its end. She realized with a clarity that was almost a physical ache that the counting did not want only names. It wanted the act of being recognized. It wanted the proof that someone remembered the remembered. Each digit was a promise to the building that another person had been accounted for, weighed, and found acceptable to be kept in its ledger. When she thought of the neighbor, she could not remember his laugh, but but she could picture the cassette under the radiator, as if it were the only thing that had ever belonged to him. The building had already begun to rearrange the world so that the missing things fit within it. She heard the final numbers, as if coming from the bottom of a well. Her voice counted them now, with a calm she did not feel. She did not resist. What energy she had left was all for naming. The last syllables left her with the trumpet-out sensation of air being held at the back of her throat. There was a small, lost panic that arrived too late. She wanted to scream her name. She wanted to scratch it back onto the walls with a fingernail and pin it there like a note, but it slid from her like rain. At the very end, there was a small, ridiculous clarity. The building did not need a body to take it, needed the proof of memory. Once the ledger held the record, it could do without flesh. Her voice now, had the same clear, merciless patience as the stairwell. She felt the muscles of her chest collapse in a slow, efficient exhalation. Her lungs folded in on each other like crumpled paper. The last syllable she formed did not sound like any number she had learned at school or at catechism. It was older, accounting from before language had names for things afterward. The apartment settled into a patient, attentive quiet. The light bulb found a lower, more content flicker. Dust in the corners rearranged itself to make room for some new accounting. The radiator breathed again, evenly, as if relieved. Down the hall, the door that had been the neighbor's was still ajar. The cassette, if there had been one, was gone. There was an absence, yes, but it was cataloged now, neat, and labeled in the building's private book. If you liked this story, please like the video, subscribe, and tell us below what time you listened.